Hey, buongiorno, come stai? I was in Florence. How about that? I was in Florence, the home of Visconti, the past week because I had a conference there. And when in Florence, of course, you have to visit some pen stores. There are no less than 2 stores that sell Visconti products. I mean, that are actually affiliated with Visconti. And one of them is operated by this extremely kind gentleman. And I had an excellent time there. He bought me coffee. It was wonderful. And I had to buy a pen and some ink from him. Because that's just, I mean, I could not resist. So today I thought we were going to have a look at Visconti Blue. It's a blue that I like. I'm not a huge fan of blues, but this one's nice. It doesn't have that school blue color, which I hate, which is just a sort of bleak, not really interesting blue that you get in cartridges that I used in school. This is a much darker, much more intense blue. Firenze di notte. And I just absolutely loved it. So this is going to go in Inkcyclopedia right now. I hope this is going to be useful, and whoops, I'll see you later. Arrivederci. Alright, so here we go with Visconti Blue. Let's start with a bit of fine writing. The quick brown fox jumped over the Duomo. One of the main sites in Florence is the Duomo, the cathedral, Renaissance cathedral, big dome, hence Duomo. I have climbed all 425 steps, and I can tell you it is completely worth it. The view is quite magnificent. I did not see any foxes jump over the dome, by the way, although that might well have happened at some point in history, you never know. Italic, the Duomo. And then we have flex. As you can see, the ink flow keeps up well. Of course, at that moment it starts to railroad. But we have seen more terrible performance recently, I would say. And then the pen stops writing. This timing is uncanny. Right. Then we have triple passes. 1, 2, 3. Uno, due, tres. I forgot, my Italian isn't that awesome. And then we should do a couple of tests. While we are at it, why don't we create a nice little letter there. This is a mixture of Gothic and foundational. Got to remain original after all. Then I shall do a little bit of medium writing. So that we can see how well the ink keeps up when it is sprayed with water. Then I think it is time for that moment you have all been waiting for, the Tardif test. A beautiful night blue color, I would say, and the brown benchmark. Now that is stunning. Stunningly beautiful blue. I'm going to close the bottle. These tip over fairly easily. Just cleaning my desk of some Visconti blue. Alright, there we are. I think we need to do a second pass. This looks relatively dry. There we go. And while this is drying, I think this is dry, yes, that means we can have a look at the bastard brush. The large F there is not yet entirely dry, so I would like to interpret some tests. First of all, there is some shading going on in this blue. It is not extremely pronounced, but there is a little bit of it. I'm probably not going to give that a very high score, but at least there is something going on. It's just not extremely pronounced. What I really do love is the color, this dark, intense blue. A lot of blues I think are quite boring. This is a nice, intense color, which I definitely will be using quite a bit. You see the shading in the brown benchmark as well as in the Tardif test, where it moves from, or shades I should say, from a lighter blue to a much darker blue. I really enjoy this color. This is rapidly moving highly up my list of favorite blues to use. Okay, now while that is still not entirely dry, I think we can do a third pass. There we go. And then I think we're just going to have to cheat a little bit and dry that up a bit. There is a very, very mild red sheen in the super wide, super broad writing, but it's not nearly as pronounced as in some of the Sailor inks, for example. Now let's have a look at the eyedropper of death. Alright, let's see what happens there. And then I think we can start to work on our score card. What about cleaning? Full marks, I've had no issues. Bleed through, we'll have to assess that later. The color is dark blue. Shading, well, there is definitely some difference, but I mean this is not what you usually do with an ink, I'm sure. I don't find it even pronounced enough to give it a mark of 2, so it has little shading. You really have to do excessive things to be able to see it, so for artists that might be a somewhat higher mark, but for me it's good. Flow I would say is excellent, no issues there. Feathering, we will have to assess that once we've seen the copier paper. We have a drying time that is somewhere in the middle. It's not extremely fast, nor is it extremely slow to dry. Waterproofness, that is something we will have to assess. Right, now I would say, let me grab a tissue here so that we can get rid of this water. Yes, you know, it's not terrible, but you can see that with the bastard brush it has eradicated pretty much all the writing. So I'm going to give this a 3. Then I think we should move to some Copier paper, which I happen to have right here, and we shall go through all the motions again. Let's start with some fine writing. That is the Duomo scene from the Belvedere. Who can recognize the movie quote? Let's do that again. That is the Duomo scene from the Belvedere. That is the Duomo scene from the Belvedere. And finally, italic. That is the Duomo scene from the Belvedere. And of course we should do some flex writing. Alright. Then a bit of fat writing. Duomo. Alright, so what do we see? What we see is, as to feathering, nothing. Very minor. I think that's still very good. Italic, very good. And then huge feathering with the flex writing. Now you probably wouldn't do that on Copier paper a whole lot, and then we get some skips. This very fat writing, you definitely see feathering on the nice wet spots. But overall, I must say I'm quite pleased with the way this ink performs. As to bleed through, there is a little bit in the medium, then there is a lot in the broad, a little bit in italic, a very large amount in the flex writing, but this was excessive flex. And you see that in the very wet writing too. So expect some bleed through. On the Rhodia paper I saw no feathering, but oh, it's still wet, bloody hell. Bleed through, a little bit for the flex writing, and of course the excessive testing, but we can't really take that seriously. So I would say if we finish up our scorecard, that bleed through, well, it's not that great because it also bleeds through with a, well, you know, it's flex nib. It also bleeds through with the broad quite a bit. I'm going to give that a middle score. It's not terrible, but it's definitely not great. Feathering, same thing. Depends on the paper, of course, but yeah. Alright. How about a comparison, huh? Well, here we have that. I'm just going to make sure there's some ink in the feed there. Here we have that Visconti blue. See, once you get a good flow going, it works fairly well, I was going to say, until you do that. You have to get flow going again. Well, we've seen that the ink can flow. I was going very fast and flex nibs, it's always an issue. I wanted to compare this to my Ultimate Blue, not because it's so spectacular, but just because it is so well behaved. Waterman Florida, aka Serenité, aka Serenity. Just a tad lighter. I think the Visconti is even a little bit more blackish. It's not a blue-black, but it has a really deep night sky color. Okay, and this pen just gives up. Squeeze a little bit of ink into the feed there. Alright, well, it's not going to like that, but there you go for your comparison. So that's a very nice, cool blue too. Very well behaved. Just a bit bluer, but I love this Visconti blue. I think it's a really cool color. So there you have it. Inkcyclopedia entry for Visconti blue. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.